Hello all, welcome back to my CCSP exam review series. And in this session, I'm going to cover the important area of Domain 2 Cloud Data Security. My name is Prab Nair and I will be your instructor in this session. And if you wish to know more about me, you can refer my LinkedIn profile. In this domain, the goal is simple is to provide you with the knowledge of the type of control necessary to administer various level of confidentiality, integrity and availability with regards to securing data in the cloud. In this domain, you will gain knowledge on topic including the data discovery and classification techniques. We're going to also understand the data digital right management, understand the different laws, which is referring to the privacy of data retention, deletion, and archiving. In this domain, we're also going to touch upon some of the areas of data event login, chain of custody, non-repudiation, and also we understand the strategic use of the security information and event management. So the first part in this domain is basically called as a describe cloud data concept. So what we're going to understand in this part is CSUSAD. CSUSAD. So we are covering the first part of this domain, which is called as a describe cloud data concept. If you wish to clear this exam, you need to have a good understanding of a CSUSAD, which is called as a create, store, use, share, archive, and destroy. Okay, so they might ask in the exam from the perspective of what happened in the create phase, what happened in the store phase, what happened in the use stage, what happened in the share, archive, and destroy. But before going to understand the CSUSAD, we need to understand why they basically test this topic in the exam. See, cloud is a dynamic. Data basically move from instance to instance, location to location, zone to zone. It is difficult to control the movement of the data. And the best way to control the movement of the data or best way to control data in the cloud is having appropriate control according to their data lifecycle. Data basically have a three state: data in transit, data in use, and data at rest. Okay, so this is the three states of data. And to understand these states in detail, we organize the every data into a life cycle. So according to that, we can able to give attention and the cost. When we're talking about this data life cycle, why we need to understand in detail? Because when we move data in the cloud, we should know what is the state of data. When you basically upload data from on-prem to the cloud, that is called data in transit. Okay, so during that time, what kind of a security we need? When the data is basically transferred from one instance to another instance, by end of the day, it's getting shared between the multiple hardware. We need to understand the kind of a security. When user try to access the application and running state in the cloud, that is data in use. So what kind of a security we need? So data lifecycle also they have described in a Cloud Security Alliance white paper. So if you want to know more in detail, I will share the link in my video sections. So Cloud Security Alliance Security Guidance, they have a white paper which enables you to understand the organization mapping of a different phase of a data lifecycle. And we also going to understand the required controls which is relevant for each phase. Example, classification done in the create phase. Data address encryption happen in the store phase. In the use stage, we implement the DLP and DRM. Most effectively, we need DLP and DRM in the use stage. Crypto sharding occurs in the destroy phase, in which phase we initiate the retention policy, archive stage. So this is how we basically map the controls. Secure data lifecycles also enable the organization to map the different phase in the data lifecycle against the required controls which is relevant for the each phase. In short, remember CSUSAD. Second part, we also need to understand the data dispersions. Data dispersion. This is also quite testable in the exam. But why we use data dispersion? Primary use of a data dispersion is for the redundancy purpose and robustness. Sorry for spelling. Redundancy and robustness. Data which is dispersed across the multiple zones. So example, we have a stance 1, stance 2, stance 3. So when you upload data in the cloud in the backend, the data is basically replicate to the multiple zones. to avoid single point of failure. If one zone is basically down from another zone, we can able to process the data. From that point of view, data dispersion has been introduced. But we need to have an appropriate control when data is basically in a dispersed state. So that also we need to understand from the exam point of view. Okay. So when you're preparing the domain 2, give attention to CSUSAD and data dispersion usage and challenges which you face in a data dispersion. The second part is basically called as a design and implement cloud data architecture. We need to understand the different type of available cloud storage services which vary by the service model. You need to understand different type of storage type, what kind of a storage we have in the IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So I'm not going to cover in detail this, but I'm just giving one touch upon area here. Example, in IaaS, we have a two type of storage. One is called as a object storage, and one is basically called as a volume storage. Pros and cons of a volume and object storage that we need to understand. Why? Because suppose you are a consultant, CCSP consultant. The company is basically requested to organize the storage and they decided what kind of storage we need to go for it. If I basically go for volume storage, then entire instances files will be stored in the volume. And if you're going for the object storage like a bucket, okay, which is required for the higher availability of a processing of a data. So in which condition, what we need to use, that is also testable in the exam. Okay, when we to use object storage and when to use volume storage. Okay, in the different type of storage, we will have a different type of encryption. So encryption is also very important. Okay, so you can refer the CSA white paper which cover the same. It is very important for you to understand the encryption on the volume level and storage level. Sorry, volume level and your object level. Why we need an encryption on the volume level, like data theft, physical theft and all that. Because of that reason, provider basically apply the encryption on the storage level. But as a CCSP, you are a consultant, you have to refer why you need encryption, because too much encryption can impact the functionality issues. So you need to understand the type of encryption we apply in the storage and according to service model and what is the primary reason of that. So when you're providing the advice to the business owner, the CCSP should also evaluate how the deployment and service model selection could negatively affect the ability of a specific business model. And that model is basically should meet the data protection and privacy law regulations. So that also we need to understand the storage parts. The next part is basically called as a threats to the storage type. In this section, we're going to discuss about the different type of storage threats. Example like unauthorized access. That is the biggest concern. Then unauthorized usage. It is because of on-demand self-services. When we basically giving instances to some non-technical user, accidentally they basically click on some links and applications which could lead to require the more computation space. And because of that, what happen is they will basically the provider basically charge with the billing. It is like a financial risk on the organization. So this is how you need to understand on demand. It's basically a requirement for the cloud computing, but that also have a big impact on the organization. That is also impact the governance issues. Another important thing we need to understand the liability due to regulatory non-compliance. Okay, so these are the different type of threats we have on the storage types, and according to these threats only we need to address the necessary controls. Threats cannot be mitigated 100%. Okay, so you need to leverage the different technologies to address these threats which basically face an enterprise with regards to the safe storage and use of its data in the cloud. The next part, which is a very important from the exam point of view, is basically called as a design and apply data security technology. Okay, in this section, we're going to discuss about the encryptions and key management. So you need to have a good understanding of a symmetric and asymmetric encryption. What kind of algorithm we basically use? Remember, ECC is basically used for the software applications, which is the alternate of the RSA. If you're looking for a limited computing with a better security, definitely RSA is more secure, but ECC also offer the equivalent amount of security as RSA, and ideally it is basically introduced for the embedded systems. And another important thing we need to remember is basically AES algorithm for the data encryption in the cloud, which is better than DES because of the computation issues. Then we also need to understand that some of the kind of attacks which is covered in cryptography, example like side channel attack, that you need to understand. So Prab, These are things are not in the book, definitely. So for some resources, you have to refer some external documents, but definitely side channel attack, AES versus DES, and ECC versus RSA is quite testable in the exam because in the cloud, the biggest concern, if you remember in the domain one, we have discussed multi-tenant, where your tenant data will be shared with other tenant. And the most effective security we have in the multi-tenant is encryption. And where the encryption is there, it is your accountability. So make sure as a CCSP consultant, you have to give the right advice to the people by which we can able to balance the functionality and security. We should not go for a complicated encryption solution, which can basically impact the functionality. So we need to balance between the functionality and security. So encryption and key management is very important because so that is a major part of the CCSP section. Because key management is another important thing. Encryption is basically driven by the key. Key is called as a factor. As per the Kirchhoff law, everything is compromised, but make sure that key should not be compromised. Because if key is compromised, data is compromised. If key is lost, data is lost. In a cloud, key play a very important role. Live example, ransomware. So in a ransomware, what happened? The attacker basically asks ransom against the key only. If you provide them ransom, he will provide the key by which we can able to decrypt the data. So key in management directly impact the availability. So the design of a data security strategy required the understanding of all these key terms. And these technologies provide the secure use of a data in the cloud and also provide cloud consumer a way of protecting and securing the data in the cloud. There is one new term is basically called as a homomorphic encryption, which is an encryption used in a data in use stage. So while you're making a notes, make a notes of the homomorphic encryption, which is basically used in a data in use stage. Homomorphic encryption, sorry. So that is the encryption we have, which can be used in a data in use stage. Data at rest and data in transit, we have SSL and TLS and all that. But when data in use, we need some kind of encryption. So in a cloud, we introduce this encryption called as a homomorphic encryption. So you need to have a good understanding of the homomorphic encryption. Alternative encryption in data and use is a masking. You need to have a good understanding of the masking. So we have a two type of masking, static and dynamic. I want to give you a live example. Static masking we use in a production database. Whenever we need to test an application and we need to use a production data, so we scramble the data. So it should not reveal the actual identity of data. That time we are doing a static masking. Dynamic masking is basically like when you call customer care, they will say, can you please confirm your last four-digit number? So rest of the information is masked like this. Only the last four-digit number is there. So in a running state of application, data is basically protected. So masking is something we use in a data in use stage, which is an alternate of encryption. It also used to prevent the shoulder surfing too. Like, when you open the login page and all that, when you type username and password, in a running state, it masks the information. If the person next to you also, he cannot able to read that. In a cloud, masking is required because encryption impact the functionality. Hope you can understand, but masking doesn't. Tokenization is an alternate solution we have for the masking. In a payment card industries, we replacing the value with the token and sent across the network. So that understanding is also required from the exam point of view. Another important topic which is required for you to understand is DLP. DLP is very, very important in CSSP. I will recommend you to review the DLP from the CSA white paper also. Okay. And Dan Cuttle CCSP second edition. That book is basically cover DLP in detail. Without DLP, do not go for the exam. DLP is heavily testable in the exam because data is dynamic in the cloud. So we need a persistent security in the cloud, and DLP, without DLP, it is difficult to apply the security. So DLP deployment, DLP cons, implementation cons, and type of inspections. All are important in the exam. Is it clear? Like we have a content base, we have a metadata base, we have a label base. So that is something which is testable in the exam. Encryption is definitely testable because it's an important technology to be considered when you're implementing a system. Okay. It is your responsibility as a CCSP to implement the encryption within the enterprise. And you need to apply the encryption in an enterprise in such a way that it provides the most security benefit. But we also need some kind of a compensatory control. And DLP is basically compensatory control. DRM is basically compensatory control. Live example I can give you. There is a data in the cloud we have. So suppose this is the data we have. Hacker was able to download the data from the cloud. It means the data is basically travel from internal to external. DLP used to monitor that internal traffic only, right? So DLP is already failed. So when data get downloaded in one of the system of a hacker, when you double click on that, it asks for the password. So there the DRM work as a persistent security. So even data was bypassed by DLP and able to get downloaded in the hacker system, still he cannot able to review that. So remember one thing, for the intellectual property, for the sensitive data, for the confidential data, we need a persistent security which is driven through a DLP with DRM only. Okay, so you need to have a good understanding also of a data obfuscation and data de-identification. Because of a GDPR requirement, this has become a mandatory. See, if someone need to search you, it can search you by the email address. Okay, email ID is basically called as a direct identifier. Email ID is your direct identifier by which we can able to search you, by which we can able to locate you. As per GDPR, we need to disable your direct and indirect identifier. Indirect identifier mean that by the location, by the phone number, by the skill set. So those are basically called as an indirect identifier. So as a part of a professional mining and all that, they are using an indirect identifier to gather your information. Because see, I know by the email address I can able to locate you, but my second question is that I don't have access of your email address. So if I want to locate Ramesh, I know this guy is working in a TCS. So in the LinkedIn, I just type TCS and Ramesh and location is Bangalore. So by applying such kind of filtering, which is indirect information, I can able to gather the Rajesh information or Ramesh information. So it is very important for us to do the data de-identification, so no one can able to predict the pattern. And in the cloud, data when it move, make sure it should be de-identified so no one can able to locate the information. So it is very important for you to understand in which state, in which condition we go for a data de-identification. It can be testable in the exam with the help of GDPR context, which is also called as anonymization, where the process of removing the indirect identifier from the database. Thank you. So hope you get a visibility about what we need to understand from these three elements. Next, we basically move to the implement data classification. See, high volume of data is basically process. Okay. Despite the large volume of controls and efforts to protect the various data types, and very few organizations able to map exactly where the sensitive data is located and what security controls are deployed to guard. So high number of data when it basically processed in the cloud, we also need to make sure we should have a appropriate security for that. And that is why whenever we are applying controls on the data, we start with the data classification only. Data classification is basically all about analyzing the data value based on what factor? Based on the criticality and sensitivity. Criticality deal with the availability, how critical it is, and sensitivity is called as a confidentiality. Along with that, we also understand the monetary, regulatory, and other factor, and based on that, we classify the data. Classification drives the data security requirement because it is not possible for us to protect everything. So in the cloud, when we dealing with the volume of data, it is very important for us to classify. Even DLP used to protect the classified data. Even DRM is there to protect the classified data. So data classification drive the security. So where the data is dispersed, this can also increase the risk and potential vulnerability associated with the storage and management, because now data even classified, we have a multiple locations where the data is getting dispersed. So it is very important for us to understand, it is very important for us to have a end-to-end control over there. And that is only possible when we have a data classification. So proper data classification is essential in order to build the effective controls. And by that, we can able to compliance with the law, regulations, and standard. That is why from the exam point of view, you need to remember data classification process is recommended for a data control, and we can basically used with the help of DLP and encryption. Because when DLP is basically monitor the data, it monitor the data based on labels and content. It is easier for us to monitor with the help of DLP if it's a classified data. And encryption is a persistent security we have in the cloud. So that is we need to understand. Labeling is basically external to the data. So DLP use a label to identify the data. So labeling is basically providing a visibility. The next part is basically called as a Data discovery, very, very important. Data discovery in the cloud is also opening up a landscape of the possibility of the inter-enterprise collaborations, which enable by sharing a data and analytics. We need to understand the different type of data discovery approach, like big data, real-time, and agile analytics. You need to understand what are the difference we have in the big data, real-time analytics, and agile analytics, because they can ask which we can go for it. We also need to understand the different type of structure and unstructured data, because that is basically used in a PaaS environment. In a PaaS, we have a two type of storage, structure and unstructured, like big data and SQL. So that also we need to understand. This is purely into discovery of a data. Okay, fine. We basically discovering the data. We have access to all data. Make sure we should have a appropriate control over the data. So as a result, CCSP need to also understand the additional layer of protection, which is called as a defense in depth. By depending upon the DLP, we cannot drive security. There is a possibility of a human can do mistake because there is no patch for human stupidity. So by hook and crook, hacker was able to download the data. Still, I want to maintain the persistent security over there. Even data is basically get downloaded or reside in some other part of the cloud or outside of the cloud. Still, I need to maintain the persistent security. Sometimes you notice when the file get downloaded in any system, still it asks for the password, or sometimes it asks for the internet connection. Without that, you cannot able to drive anything. So that is why DRM is basically play a very important role which control the movement of a data in the cloud. Is it clear? So right management technology use the identity base access, which can be achieved even by the help of ABAC control. Based on the context, we can block the content. Based on the content, we can block the things. Example, Hotstar in India. If you try to open Hotstar in Middle East, or if you try to open the Hotstar in Europe and all that, it is banned. Same like Netflix also, some series are available in India. That is a DRM only. And these contents are easily managed through our policies, which are enforced across the servers and endpoint applications. So we have a two type of DRM, uh, which is used to control the digital content. One is basically called as a consumer DRM, and one is basically called as an enterprise DRM. Adobe DRM is a big example of a consumer DRM. Office 365, which is using the application encryption for the emails and all that, that is an enterprise DRM, just for your knowledge, okay? But I used to cover in detail in my sessions. As I discussed, this is just a high level overview. So you need to understand when we need a consumer DRM and when we need an enterprise DRM. Exam standpoint, DRM work with DLP to provide the effective security, okay, as a compensatory control. So this is the part. The next thing is basically called as a plan and implement data retention, deletion, archiving policy. Once the data basically complete its life cycle, we decided data to move to the long-term storage. So after archival, we retain the data for some period of time, which is by default a requirement of the regulatories. Like health data need to be retained for 6 years, or service data need to be retained for 5 years. So we have a different kind of a data retention requirement from a legal authority, and according to that, we retain data. More you retain, more liability comes. So the best way is the retain for the defined time, and once you're done, delete automatically. So it basically save your organization from a liability point of view. It is very important for you to make sure you amend this kind of a contract with the cloud provider, who will take the responsibility of the data retention and all that. So tomorrow if cloud providers say that, okay, we will retain the data for a 7 year or 8 year, writing it does not mean happens. Go look and verify. So with the help of audit, we can able to validate those statements. So data protection policies we need to introduce, which can address your data retention, which can basically address your data retention, which can basically address how to delete data. It's very important for you to understand the different type of deletion. I know in CSSP we have this degaussing and all that. It's quite testable in the CCSP also. In CCSP we talk about crypto shading, but you still know other deletion methods and how to archive the data. And if you want this to be followed, the best thing is that create a policy. What need to be included in the policy, do and don't in the policy, that is required, because policies serve as the operational foundation for all aspect of the data management. And that should be clearly reflected in the data retention, deletion and archiving policies. The next part is basically called as a design and implement auditability, traceability, and your accountability. Now, data has been classified, data has been retained as per the legal regulatory requirement. One point I missed in the retention part, how retention works actually. Suppose this is my primary storage where all data is there. When data is complete its life cycle, we flag for archive and move to the offsite. And we keep the same level of security the way we basically maintain for the primary locations. But yes, we have an appropriate policy and according to that, we maintain the data. Still data in an archive stage is my accountability. So that is why we're creating a retention policy that okay, after some period of time we need to purge data. So it basically avoid my liabilities. Is it clear? So that is the biggest motivation for the senior management to create a retention policy which save their storage cost. Otherwise, what happen? We don't know for how long we need to retain the data. Now, once your data has been done, make sure maintaining its effectiveness and all that because data move in the cloud, it used for several reasons. So it need to have a proper auditability, traceability, accountability. So data stored in the cloud replicate and move and backup and restore just as a non-cloud data. However, the dynamic and elastic nature of a cloud can also present the unique challenges when you're looking to build the efficient data governance policy in the virtualized and multi-tenant environment, especially in a multi-tenant environment. So from a time to time, organization need to collect and investigate data in response to the security incident, data breach, and support of the litigation. So in a cloud environment, ability to identify, obtain, preserve, and analyze the potential digital evidence is a challenging task. An organization that do not prepare in advance will find the incident handling, auditing, forensic investigation process to be very challenging to undertake and manage successfully. That is why in this section we need to have a good understanding of the chain of custody. We need to have a good understanding of a non-repudiation which can be mapped with the timestamp. Non-repudiation play a very important role because it map with the timestamp. With the help of logs, we can able to track the non-repudiation. With the help of logging, storage, and data events, we can able to recreate the incident. The biggest concern for a CCSP to do the investigation in the cloud of the lack of visibility. Remember that this is the exam question also. It can be the exam question also. Visibility is the biggest concern. Multi-tenancy is another biggest concern. Okay, and the favorable contract can only way to manage the risk of gathering the data in the cloud. Suppose you are dealing with the Amazon for kind of a services and everything, and they deny later that okay, we cannot provide data. So favorable contract can able to establish the governance. So it is very important whatever the data we have, we can able to audit, we can able to trace, and we can able to establish the accountability. And that is why with the help of CSU SAD, which is called as a data life cycle, we can able to map the responsibility charts. So who is responsible for creating, who is responsible for store, who is responsible for deleting, blah 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 blah. So summary is very important in this domain. Important areas we have which you should not skip for any reason is DRM, DLP, and storage encryptions. Trust me, if you skip, even you basically ignore this topic for any reason, you will be in a you will be in a trouble. So CSA white papers are there on a DLP, encryptions, DRMs, refer that, NIST, DRM, DLP documents, refer that. It is very important for you. Okay, you should not depend upon the primary study material of the books. You have to refer the external books, external white papers to have a better understanding. So this is all from my side. Hope you enjoyed this particular session. And if you have any questions, you can basically post in the comment section. And my next session, I'm planning on a CISA and CISM, and then I will basically cover the domain 3 of a CCSP. For more information, subscribe my YouTube channel and do share your feedbacks. Based on that feedback only, I will try to improve my session. Thank you, team.